Hello again, co-philosophers. I've got a new video post today and a new post on my Dawn website, up at Dawn 2.0, How the World Thinks and Other Things. I've also made an audio version if you prefer just to listen. Today in CoPhi, we begin with Socrates, but I have some misgivings about that. The past several semesters, I've made a point of spending quality time with pre-Socratics, but this time there were other texts that I wanted to make room for. But I do want to take a moment to just say Democritus of Abdera was no dummy. I am echoing Carl Sagan. If you click on the link in the text, it'll take you to him, making the point that Democritus, either with brilliant insight or just good luck, he figured out or guessed that the world is composed of atoms, tiny bits that we can't see but that make up what we can. The first, or one of the first atomists. And Protagoras, another pre-Socratic. Protagoras the sophist. Our word sophistry comes from the ancient philosophical school of sophists, of which Protagoras was a member. They had a bad reputation in their day, and sophists, people who practice sophistry in our day, have a bad reputation. We tend to think of lawyers, at least bad lawyers, or maybe good lawyers, as sophists. People who have no particular scruples about getting the truth and the facts out if they're defending a client who's guilty. They will use rhetorical tricks to sway a jury. Well, back in the day, the original sophists, Protagoras among them, were accused of bending the facts, making the so-called weaker argument the stronger, etc., of being manipulators of perception and of not being honest and people of integrity. They accused Socrates of being a sophist. He was not one, not in the nefarious sense that we're talking about. They also had a bad opinion of people who accepted favors or remuneration for teaching. And they accused Socrates of that too. Now, he insisted he never took a drachma for his conversation and his time. But there were sophists, like Protagoras, who did accept payment when they tutored typically young men. And I'm just glad that we've gotten over that aversion to paying teachers. Would I do it if they didn't pay me? Well, I wouldn't do it as much, I can tell you that. But in any case, Protagoras and the sophists have a reputation still of relativism, being relativist. And I say he was no screaming relativist, but more like a pragmatist. You could take him as a relativist if you thought that when he said man is the measure of all things, that he was saying that each one of us gets to set our own standards of what counts as a fact or truth or reality. But I don't think that's what he had in mind. I think what he was saying was that we as a community or as a species determine what our standards of factuality, reality, and truth are. We determine the standards. Once we determine them, they're objective. Once you decide that 12 inches makes a ruler, makes a foot, that's a standard. That's an objective and fixed standard, which is the measure, right? And we made it, right? Or somebody amongst us made it, and we accepted it. And then Thales, another pre-Socratic, one of the first whom we talk about. He was right, though they made fun of him for saying that water is the essence of all things, or the ultimate reductive substance of all things. He was fundamentally right. Water is a universal solvent. Try creating life without it, at least life in any form that we're familiar with. So, bottom line, the pre-Socratics were trying to puzzle out a naturalist account of our human condition. They were headed in the right direction. And you can read all about them, as we have previously when I was using this other text, in Anthony Gottlieb's wonderful first volume History of Western Philosophy. It's called The Dream of Reason. Its sequel is called The Dream of Enlightenment, and I think there's a third sequel in the works that will come right to the present I don't know what kind of a dream that's going to be, but it'll be good. Anthony Gottlieb. I linked to The Dream of Reason in my text if you want to check him out. I've been telling everyone in my Zoom classes that our goal in co-philosophy is amicable conversation, collaboration, and mutual support. That's probably only possible if we embrace the Socratic definition of a successful conversation, that is, one in which nobody wins, in which everybody acknowledges the depths of our shared ignorance, and we resolve to continue a conversation constructed upon careful listening and the proffering of reasons for our claims and statements. In times like these, that would be quite the achievement. But let's go for it. Plato said, we're like cave dwellers who are clueless about what's outside. That's from Book 7 of the Republic, in which he offers the analogy or the simile of the cave. He imagines prisoners, inhabitants of a cave, who think that is the world. That's all the world they know. And Plato says, that's us. We are them, they are us. Clueless about what's really outside, most of us. Except for the true philosophers who figure it out, right? And it turns out the true philosophers on Plato's rendering are Platonists. Surprise. Well, I agree with the first part of that statement. We are substantially in the dark about much, and we are cut off from the light, but maybe the light is not out there, beyond the sun, and well beyond the cave. Maybe it's more a product of our own reasoning and empirical observation and circumspect critical analysis of the natural facts that we can behold right here in the cave of our world. If we are prisoners held captive by a notion that reality is easy to glean on the walls and screens directly before our eyes, directly before our passive gaze, kind of like the bar stool patrons at the boulevard during happy hour, maybe, or some of them, then we need to get up, move around, explore the world. We need to get more peripatetic, as I've also been saying. We need to take our minds to the gym, roam our thinking paths like Darwin on his sand walk in Kent, or Bertrand Russell on his daily morning's hour perambulations. His friend Miles Mallison said that Bertie would go for a walk for an hour every morning and come home and write fluidly and without interruption and without revision for the rest of the morning. In other words, the implication is that by going for a walk, he cleared his mind of everything extraneous and got out of his own way and proceeded to write all those books. And I'm no Bertrand Russell, but I have found that my writing goes better after an hour's walk, and better yet after an hour and a half. There gets to be a point of diminishing returns, I'm sure, but I don't think I've found it yet. Maybe then we'll discover the light of the sun to be nothing transcendent in a metaphysical sense, but merely a metaphor for the mind, unshackled by prejudice and lazy complacency. You don't transcend nature when you navigate its byways. You find yourself planted more firmly in her. What would Plato make of our modern versions of the cave? In particular, all those entertaining flickering screen spectacles and shadows that we stare at incessantly and seem incapable of tearing ourselves away from. Rebecca Goldstein, in her book Plato at the Googleplex, imagines he'd be smitten with the silicon simulacrum's capacity to deliver information, but possibly not so sure of its relation to wisdom. I would not want to live in Plato's so-called utopian republic myself, not if I don't get to make my own vocational choices and rise or fall on my own merits and initiative there. Much as I talk about what I would decree if I were philosopher king, I'll take my chances with what we're still calling democracy. But ask me again in November. 2/3 of Americans, Kurt Anderson reports in Fantasyland, believe in angels and demons. Really? I mean, I know a lot do, but 2/3? I know that maybe that many say they do, but surely a percentage of them are like my daughter. They say it just to annoy me. Today, for the first time in my classes, we will take up Julian Baggini's How the World Thinks. How the World Thinks, a Global History of Philosophy. As a needed complement to Nigel Warburton and his little history of philosophy, which, as I said, should really be called a little history of Western philosophy. A needed complement because, they've philosophized all over the world, not just in the European and North American continents. Philosophies for everybody. As I said in reporting William James's first lecture of pragmatism, you all have a philosophy, whether you're in the American or Western traditions or some other. Wherever and whoever and whatever you are, if you're human, you are at least in germ and potential a philosopher. Well, so we'll be complementing Warburton with Baggini. We'll find out how the world thinks. I'm sure that Baggini must be right when he says, at the end of the prologue, that bi and multicultural people do indeed score higher on creativity. And I would add, not to mention empathy, insight, and wisdom. They, sadly, unlike most people historically and many people regionally in some places, do enjoy encountering new ideas, philosophies, religions, traditions, etc., and assimilating what's distinctive in each. Writing that last line, I realized it sounds a lot like Captain Picard's nemesis, the Borg, a monolithic aggressor that robs individuals of their autonomy while muttering the mantra that resistance is futile. Nothing could actually be further from the cosmopolitan ideal of genuine global citizenship. I like that Baggini mentions Kwame Anthony Appiah, the ethicist, the writer of the New York Times Magazine's ethicist column. Check it out online, or if you're a dinosaur like me, in the printed version of the Sunday paper. He wrote Cosmopolitanism, and more recently a terrific book on identity, which we used in my Mala class, Identity and Truth. And he makes the point. Cultural identity is a complex thing, can be a very complex thing. He being of two traditions, Ghana, North Africa, as well as Britain, had a British mother, English mother, and a Ghanaian father. And we're not all as complicated as that, but we all have a thicker DNA lineage than we are aware of, most of us. So we need to recognize the complexity of our cultural identity, the richness of our cultural identity, and embrace that. Embrace our diversity, not shrink from it. Embrace other people's diversity, too. I also like Baggini's citation of neo-pragmatist Richard Rorty's repudiation of the philosopher's own scholastic little definitions of philosophy, intended to exclude other traditions and cultures from the conversation of mankind. Now, I don't think most philosophers are guilty of wanting to exclude them. It's just that they end up defining their discipline in such a way that they are excluded, right? Inadvertently, perhaps, rarely maliciously, but in any case, scholasticism was that medieval mindset that split too many hairs and drew too many fine distinctions, and thereby left too much out of account. And so we need to resist the scholastic tendency in defining philosophy. I think we're still okay with that James definition, the unusually stubborn effort to think clearly. I don't think that's too narrow. I think it's good and broad in the way that it should be. But again, the Jamesian point, the pluralistic form of philosophy requires many voices and visions, many and various perspectives, endless and multiple points of view. So we'll be talking world philosophy and other stuff in CoPhi, and then later this afternoon in environmental ethics in our Zoom room. We will commence our look at Robin Attfield. That's who dropped onto the floor a minute ago. Robin Attfield's little environmental ethics, a very short introduction, which announces early on, quote, "The environment that our grandchildren will inherit will be vastly different from that of our early ancestors, and even from the environment we were born into ourselves." He's not talking about the pandemic or the political swamp pit of our present moment, but he could be. In any case, the world is awash in change, which is not bad, but also uncertainty, which need not be bad, and executively orchestrated chaos, which has been bad. It would be hard to dispute or dissuade a young person who had concluded that this world, as tendered by the older generation, that in fact the older generation has saddled their generation with an irretrievable climate crisis in the broadest sense of climate or environment. I've had more than a few conversations with young anti-natalists whose present intent is to stop propagating our species altogether, saying they find it unconscionable to contemplate bringing new life into such a world. How sad. But I'm still wearing my rally cap, my figurative rally cap, hoping for the right kind of change. That astronaut's image of the Earth hanging beautifully and vulnerably in space, which is on page 2 of Attfield's little book, is still transformative and inspiring for me, as it was the first time I saw it as a kid in the 60s. It's still a powerful reminder that we are one species on a small rock with every incentive to bridge our differences and make a habitable, sustainable world for our children's children, etc., ad infinitum. Every incentive. The heedless, voracious, unsustainably anthropocentric last man cannot be our paradigm, right? Like the last man is like the onceler, who thinks that it's okay to go ahead and burn, baby, burn. Burn up all the fossil fuels, use up all the resources, plunder other species in the process, and get what we can while we're here to get it, and give no thought for what kind of a world we'll be passing along to those who follow us. That cannot be our paradigm. We cannot make that our paradigm or our model or our template or our example. Certainly not a moral example. Biospherical egalitarianism, a mouthful of a concept, but it's really a very simple concept. The equal entitlement of all species to live their own way of life expresses a lovely live and let live sentiment. But I must confess my own bias for human solidarity and survival. Live and let live, but prioritize humans if ever a choice must be made. But you'll have to show me, I am from Missouri, that a choice must be made. My inclination is to presume that human survival will not require animal and plant species sacrifice, that in fact our survival depends on living holistically and harmoniously in concert with every other form of life. Just about every other form of life. I still think I could do without the mosquitoes. But anyway, one of my discussion prompts today asks if Stoicism is the wrong philosophy for this moment. If indeed Stoicism counsels that we should follow nature in the sense of complying with the status quo, because the status quo is not a good place to be in too many ways right now. But let's not jettison Stoicism. Let's fix it. Let's amend it, complement it with pragmatism, Stoic pragmatism, which my old mentor John Locke articulated and wrote about. I'm looking here on this shelf. I know his book is up here. There it is. Stoic pragmatism. Oh, are you still there? I'm going to